So, Chapter 5 of Deltarune is almost here, and I think now is as good a time as any to reflect on the past 4 chapters to see if we can glean the events of the new game based on the old ones. Deltarune is no stranger to leaving clues, so hopefully this ends up looking like a miraculous prediction and less like me grasping at straws trying to convince you that Rule's card is the knight. Deltarune Chapter 1 starts with a really creepy voice, which many consider to be W.D. Gaster, considering Gaster's only lines in Undertale being about what is obviously a dark fountain. Dark, darker, yet darker, directly parallels to ralsei's speech about what darkness are. On the same note, ralsei as a character is very suspicious. They know everything that will transpire that's mentioned in the prophecy, and they also have the ability to control what the player sees. He does this blatantly whenever he asks Chris to think about Susie before the camera cuts to her. He is quite dismissive of himself, very secretive, and he can also straight up see your screen. This chapter has a couple major standouts with characters. There is of course the main characters, but Jevel is very interesting. He sets up the idea of shadow crystals, an object that seems to make darkness much stronger, with the side effect of making them lose their mind. He was spoken to by the knight and figured out his world was just a game, and after he gets sealed away, only he could be free. And he's not entirely wrong. Every other character has their actions defined by code, forcing them to do things, but Jevel isn't scripted or coded when he's locked away. He's not being controlled until you speak to him, and only then is he bound by the game. And when he gets into the full swing of things, he uses RNG for his moves, meaning he isn't being controlled. He also predicts the involvement of the Queen, how dark fountains are created, as well as the Knight and one of their first moves. But to be honest, he's probably not showing up again.
Bye bye!
Charm is another character that draws the eye. He's the first shopkeeper and he sealed away Jevel, and even had an item that was pivotal to surviving the night, the Shadow Mantle. But unfortunately for you, he forgot where he put it. There is some other things I need to say about Shorm, but I'm going to save them for later. Probably more important than Shorm is the man behind the tree, who gives eggs. He can only be reached by accessing the rooms in between, by entering and exiting the same room over and over again. But in Chapter 3 he can be found in Man Country, where he actually talks and says he will be forgotten soon enough. And in Chapter 4, the tree room is completely different, being in art therapy where Chris draws something only to cover up with a tree, before they compulsively wash their hands. The room is pitch black, and an interesting thing about this room is once again, he is between 2 doors, stuck between time and space perhaps. With the one time he wasn't in Man Country, he was in a completely green world. Which draws us to Sans and Papyrus's house in Undertale, where between their rooms is a green picture with a bone on it. This is why many believe that the Eggman could be Gaster, with many thinking that Gaster is related to Sans and Papyrus as he's named after a font. There is probably more set up in Chapter 1, but nothing really comes to mind. Chapter 2 starts, and this chapter could be argued to be the most lore significant, because in Chapter 2 we are introduced to a nifty little thing called psychological manipulation, and it's done through the weird route. A route that involves the newly added party member Noelle, where you freeze all the enemies to make her stronger, with this all culminating with Noelle freezing her classmate Birdley, and you defeating the would-be secret boss Spamton after he takes over the Queen's mansion. This route deviates from the normal story, and there is speculation over what it will mean. In the Mantle game, it's referred to as the Forbidden Path, and the Mantle game seems to be the Dark World version of Dragon Blazers, which was an adaptation of the Lord of the Hammer series, which Gerson based off the prophecy. It's safe to say that the weird route will definitely have some major ramifications. At the very least, Birdley will be removed from the story as he is hospitalized, and Noelle seems to be altered by the events as she says she'll even go to the festival with Chris if you continue this path in Chapter 4. Brushing the weird route somewhat to the side, we've got the guy who actually allowed the weird route to get as far as it did, Spamton. Spamton is a secret boss just like Jevel, but he actively involves himself in the story and calls on you to find him. He's glitchy and he seems to have been affected by the night. But more interestingly, he's in a state we see him in because he rose to be a big shot with the help of someone over the phone, just for them to disappear and leave only garbage noise behind. The same garbage noise that we hear if we ring our phone while in a dark fountain. Once again, there seems to be this meta-narrative about darkness and video game characters. Once Spamton gets his Neo body and gets big, he's still bound, he's still not free. Freedom is what he craves. The freedom motif used initially in the world revolving is typically the secret boss theme. Jevel believed himself to be free, but he was alone in a cage, and when Spamton gets big, he craves for freedom, thus the freedom motif. His strings seem to be an allegory for the code of the game that binds him. the script, the prophecy, and even if you attempt to help him, it won't turn out well, no matter what. A sentiment that Chris knows all too well. They are a puppet just like Spamton, controlled by you the player, and when Chris can call out for help, Ralsei shuts them down, telling Chris to just not think about what just happened, to move on. Probably because Ralsei knows the feeling of having your actions be predetermined considering they know about the prophecy. I'm glossing over a lot of the story at this point and getting to the only noticeable standout bits, but there is a throwaway line that sticks out in the Giga Queen fight. About Queen having something over the Fun Gang, and that's detachable hands. Out of the Dark Fountain though, Chris heads home with Susie coming along for a sleepover, only for Chris to create a Dark Fountain in their own house. Leading up into Chapter 3. Chapter 3 starts and immediately you're given direct confirmation that dark fountains are darker. Darkness are objects in the real world, and when a place gets so dark, it creates something akin to life, and those objects are shaped by their connections. And Tanner goes to show that this is most certainly the case. He knows all about Chris's childhood because he was present for it as a TV, but he isn't that much of a great guy. He's lost his composure due to years of neglect and family disputes, as well as a divorce of his own. And it doesn't just end with emotional issues. Tanner has connections with the Knight, awaiting for them to arrive while also having made a deal with Chris. And that is shown to us in the Secret Sword route, which also alludes to the Weird route, clearly showing us freezing a bird monster to proceed. The boss at the end of this route is Iram, a character we know pretty much nothing about. They seem to be a Darkner that has just been imprinted on in this game, and they are probably doing evil shit in the bunker. There isn't much to say about them except for the fact that they act as an antagonistic force that will mock Chris and claim that they enjoyed forcing their friend into snowbraving Birdley. This fight gives us the Shadow Mantle, a strong piece of armor that negates a lot of the damage from Dark and Star attacks, a useful tool especially when going against the Knight. The entity that was being teased for most of the game. They're here, and they absolutely cheap shot Tanner. This would have never happened if Tanner knew they were there, by the way. The Knight fight can be quite tough, but if you beat this encounter, you're not allowed to win. The Knight wins through cutscene magic, and the story continues as normal with Undyne being taken with Toriel left behind and the Knight entering the bunker with 3 codes needed. One with a police badge, one with a pine tree, and one with a Deltarune. Now the identity of the Knight is hotly debated, and most draw their eyes towards the Holiday family considering the Knight has antlers, and the Holidays have a missing child. But what is more interesting right now is what the Knight was doing with a Shadow Crystal. Now we know Jevil got the Shadow Crystal from the Knight, and Spamton just so happened to find his in the Neo body, and Gerson in the next chapter being given one but choosing not to use it. The question that gets brought up is why? Why is the Knight giving out Shadow Crystals to Darkness, and how do they find their pick? Because despite the fact that the Knight isn't present, the idea that these secret bosses have is present in yet another character in this chapter. Ram, a character that knows Chris and offers awards in the front, but whispers of freedom in the back room. And it's so shameless, so unabashedly there. They will go off about freedom and even link you with a genuine secret boss related to the Knight with Eram. So how? Why is it that freedom keeps rearing its head? Could it be that this is Chris's fountain and they desperately crave it? Or that Ram is near a Dark World version of Dragon Blazers which mirrors the prophecy, only to see Tanner change it? If it's because it's Chris's fountain, is that why inserting the numbers 1225 into the capsule machine leads to a secret area? Because they missed December holiday? And why on earth do we find dialogue to Chris losing their hand? We don't really have many answers, but most things culminate in the next chapter. Chapter 4 introduces Gerson, who acts as a mentor to Susie. It also implies that the Knight knew Gerson while he was alive, since they could create a Darkner version of him that embodied him. Sorry Papyrus Knight believers, but Papyrus just showed up in town. He'd have no clue who Gerson is. It's most likely to be Des, Noelle's missing sister, considering the Knight's blade for a moment looks like a bat, an item that we see in Des's room, and the song Raise Up Your Bat is played after Tanner talks about Des, and back in chapter 1, Noelle says Des used to hit Chris with a wiffle bat. It could be Carol considering the katana in her room, as well as the mysterious voice Chris is working with says that they'll show up, and then Carol does. And since we know Chris is working with the Knight, it's not a stretch to believe that Carol could be the Knight, but it's a bit of a stretch to believe she was able to sneak past you and show up in the fountain before you. It could also be Rudy, but I think it's Des or Carol. Chapter 4, of course, has a church dark fountain, and this is the real heavy bit, because we finally get to see the prophecy, at least most of it. There are lots of prophecies in this chapter, which are worth talking about. The most immediate one would be the Flower Man, alone trapped in Asylum. Now this prophecy is 100% about Asgore, but on the surface it doesn't really say much. That is until we find out that the 5th chapter of Lord of the Hammer takes place in a field of pink and gold, charred in an inferno of jealousy. Now this is catchy, because throughout Deltarune, we have seen Asgore in a desperate state. He desperately wants to get back to Toriel. He barges in on her while in the shop, he hides in the trees near the bunker to surprise her with flowers, and he's been doing this often enough that Toriel's bin has a floral scent that gets stronger and stronger. We see Asgore in Carol's house. And by the end of chapter 4, we easily see something that could incite jealousy, and that is Sans. Sans and Toriel have gotten a lot closer, and I don't think Asgore could handle seeing them together, meaning in chapter 5, we'll probably see Asgore take a much larger role. There is also another part of this prophecy to look at, pink and gold. These colours are important. They are the colours that Spamton had on its glasses, and they are also on another character who hides throughout the game. And this brings me to the nefarious Friend. Friend is a character that has been watching for a very long time. All the way back in chapter 2, there is an area needed to get to the Spamton Neophyte, and it's known as Digital Roots, an empty area with smiling plugs, an old Neobody, and even a Shadow Crystal. The most interesting thing in here though, is that we are being watched by a smiley face known in the files as Image Friend. He appears in ralsei's Darkner explanation looking similar to one of the Amalgamates, and then we see him again in the ERAM fight after Bit Roots. So far, he has been in 2 digital replications of an area called Roots, and we can see a prophecy titled Roots, featuring 2 trees and a house, and right next to the prophecy is a scrambled warning. Lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail. And elsewhere there is another prophecy. They'll see the tail of hell take crawl. In an area called Roots, we see a house with trees next to it. The place before the forest forms will have the tail of hell take crawl. Could it be that the field of pink and gold will have the tail of hell take crawl upon Asgore's inferno of jealousy, transforming the area to create the place we know as Roots? The house we see could be that asylum, a version of the house he wishes to return to, a house stable, surrounded by trees, with Asgore being able to see everything back to normal. It is my belief that chapter 5 will have Asgore as the chapter boss and Friend act as the secret boss. I imagine Friend will have a similar role to Spamton, even to the point that they may take control of the story if the player has initiated the weird route. And my reason for this is due to the fact that there are only items that negate select types of damage. Star and Dark is the most apparent. The Knight utilizes this type of damage, and the Shadow Mantle resists a large amount of that damage. But interestingly enough, the only other type of damage that gets negated by some items is Cat/Puppet. The Mannequin and the Frayed Bowtie negate this type of damage. This can be explained away as this is just the damage that Spamton uses, but the Deal Maker, the item Spamton drops if you spare him, also negates some Cat and Puppet damage, even more than the others in fact, as well as being a really strong piece of armor you'll probably still use in chapter 4, considering it also has the added effect that it gives you more money. And these items are glasses of pink and gold. Where does that sound familiar? And how come Spamton uses this damage anyway? How come he uses cat-type elemental damage? Puppet makes sense, but cat? I reckon it's because of Friend somehow, and these items will prove useful against Friend.
Like that's ever gonna happen.
At last was the girl. This bit of the prophecy was probably the most spread around theory I've seen for Deltarune. The fact that there seems to be 2 girls referred to in the prophecy, with the girl with hope crossed in her heart even wielding a sword, which we know Noelle is able to equip, with coded dialogue for equipping the Jingle Blade as well as the Black Shard. Love finds its way to the girl is apt when referring to Noelle, and the At Last Was the Girl prophecy features an act symbol. Now we could say this stands for Noelle, but Susie's main attack, Rude Buster, looks just like this, and Susie also has a carpet in her room of the same symbol. the implications of Susie not being one of the trio that seals away the Angel's Heaven is quite interesting. We know from Gerson in the Lord of the Hammer series, Susie reminds Gerson of the dragon, so maybe at the end with the final prophecy, the prophecy is depicting a fate the dragon could change. If Susie isn't one of the three heroes, at the very least it guarantees that Noelle is not the angel, since she has to seal away the Angel's Heaven. In the end, all we can do is wait. My locked-in prediction is that Chapter 5 has Asgore creating a dark fountain due to Toriel's relationship with Sans. An area with roots will appear, with Friend acting as a secret boss, and on the weird route, he may take over considering Noelle is pretty much confirmed to join our party in Chapter 5, and we wouldn't have the puppet and cat negating items, considering the fact that they're not available on the weird route.
Now I will sleep for another 100 years. Bye bye.